What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Saturdays in the SEC, episode 83. We're back with week 3 of our 2023 SEC preview series. We're going to touch on Mississippi State and South Carolina tonight. But first, a little news today. In college football, we've talked a lot about conference realignments, the past few months throughout summer, about what that's going to look like in 2024 and beyond that. And the big news today, Colorado is going to be joining the Big 12 with Coach Prime. So that's certainly going to be interesting. But Carden, just kind of give me your thoughts on not only Colorado joining the Big 12, but just how this conference realignment is as a whole going forward.
What's really funny is that the Pac-12's commissioner actually came out like last week and said that this cycle of realignment is over, and then loses Colorado like 6 days after saying that. So Colorado's going back to the Big 12, obviously former members of them. Apparently there's some scuttlebutt about another Pac-12 team that no one is expecting. So not Oregon and not Washington, that's potentially talking about leaving and joining the Big 12 as well. I never caught that name. I just heard some rumors that there's another team in the Pac-12 looking to move that you wouldn't think when you think of people leaving the Pac-12. But the Pac-12 is soon to be no more. I believe people are like looking for ways to get out of there. I think this move was hurried along for Colorado's sake, just because Prime's there. I think that has a big part of a reason that they went to the Big 12, bigger market, better fan base market or whatever. So I like the move. I think they need to get out of the Pac-12 because the Pac-12, like I said, is dying. But I think that everything is going to look completely different. Obviously, we know that. But starting in 2024, there's going to be not only teams are joining the SEC and teams are joining the Big 12, the playoffs start expanding. And then it's just there's no more divisions in the conferences and in the SEC anyhow. And so it's going to be a completely different college football that we're watching, but I feel like we're going to fall in love with it the same way that we have the college football that we're used to and the college football that we were used to 10 years ago. Like, this is different than 10 years ago, but we fell in love with it all over again. And I think that's just going to happen because it's just going to be more storylines, more drama added to everything because as more people have a chance to get in and make it to the end. So I'm all the talks about everything moving and changing. I'm not upset about it because we're going to fall in love with it all over again because it's college football, and that's always great content.
Yeah, I think this is a big move for the Big 12 too, just because, I mean, obviously they lost Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. So they really needed a big name, a big brand. And obviously, as you mentioned, Colorado with Coach Prime, like that brings a lot of attention. I mean, there's more talk about Colorado than the last 25 years combined going into this year. I mean, just because of the factor of him being there and him potentially, bringing them back to prominence a little bit. So that was a big move for the Big 12, getting a brand, a brand like Colorado and a team that's probably going to be on the rise again, more than likely, especially if he stays there for a while. So,
I think you're right. I think it's more right now you're getting the brand of Prime over Colorado from the jump, and then it'll become Colorado's brand.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's a huge, deal for the Big 12. I mean, you lose two brands like Texas and Oklahoma, you're not going to be able to replace them, but I think they've done a pretty good job of getting, what they can. Like you said, the Pac-12's on the decline. It's probably going to be obsolete before too long. So teams are just positioning themselves for the future and trying to find the best landing spot for them. I mean, it comes down to money, obviously. But having the best chance to make the playoffs, you get more money, you have better chance in NIL opportunities, facilities, and all that, and be able to compete at the highest level. So this was definitely, a good move for Colorado. And I think because obviously they weren't going to come to the SEC, they're not going to go to the Big 10. So I think they found probably the next best landing spot for them, really the most logical move they could make. So, but yeah, obviously 2024, it's going to be crazy. And I think this is far from over too. I think in the years following 2024, it's going to keep evolving and more teams are going to try to get in these, super conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten. I mean, that's where the most money is, the TV deals and the majority of the teams that can compete at a high level, make the playoffs, and win a national title or in those
Right.
two leagues. So yeah, it's going to be crazy. We'll continue to cover it, but obviously we've had a lot of time to talk about that over the summer. But kind of want to transition now into our previews. Mississippi State, obviously a unique situation this year with the passing of Mike Leach and Zach Arnett stepping into that head coaching role. Going to be a different look for them this year. They're going away from the
Big
air
time.
raid and going more to a balanced offense. They bring in Kevin Barbay from Appalachian State to run the offense, and they're going to be more of a pro-style balance, more physical up front. Just kind of want to get your thoughts on Mississippi State's outlook for this year and kind of what you're expecting with that transition from the air raid.
It 100% is going to look completely different. It's going to be a completely different team of what you're used to seeing. A lot of the same guys. They have a lot of guys back. I believe they return, 7 starters on offense. They have 4 of their 5 offensive linemen are back. But it's going to be weird because we're going to see Will Rogers under center a fair amount. They're going to hand the ball off a lot. But Tulu Griffin has moved from the outside receiver to the inside receiver. It's kind of he's the one they're looking to be their guy on the receiver, the one to step up and be their man on the outside, their weapon. But he's moving to inside in the slot. They're probably going to use him and handoffs as well, like end-around handoffs, kind of like he did in the spring game, first play or first drive. He was the one that took it however long to the house around the end, and big tight end block on that play as well. But there's going to be a lot of tight end usage, which hasn't been seen in Mississippi State since Mike Leach has been there. Pretty much forgot about the tight ends in his offense. So you're going to see some tight ends, and they're going to be used in different ways. They're going to be used as blocking tight ends and to go run routes as well. So I'm excited to see that. But they won 9 games last year for the first time since 2017, and they had a good passing offense, but they had the worst rushing offense in the league. They were 14th in the league in rushing offense. So, that's not going to win games. You got to be more balanced. And I think this year, especially with the veteran offensive line, they got a bunch of starts throughout that offensive line. I expect them to look completely different, but I expect them to put up numbers. And I think Zach Arnett, he's got a tall task to take on this year, but I think to inherit a team like Mississippi State or, not a bad team, but a lesser team in the league, a kind of middle of the pack team, to take over a team like that, I think he stepped into a great situation with the roster the way it is. Now, defensively, it's a little different. They've lost a lot more people. They're going to be a little slim there, a lot of new faces on that side of the ball. But he knows all those guys, and their defense was stellar last year. They're 34th in the nation, I believe, in total defense. So I don't expect their defense to fall off too much. And I really just am excited and curious more than anything to see how new their offense looks and what differences they're gonna do. I know it's going to be a completely different offense, but I want to know how it unfolds and what it's going to look like. And all this talk about Will Rogers being a system quarterback, we've heard that ever since he's been time in the league. He has the completion percentage record in SEC history. Like, the dude can make reads and he can complete passes. He knows what he's doing. Yes, Leach's offense was set up for quarterback success, and it helped him understand where they were going pre-snap and stuff. But people are acting like this cat can't make reads and pick apart defenses and toss the ball around. And with them bearing down and having more a focus on the run and going to lean on that a little bit more, it's going to open up the passing game even more for him. So I look for Will Rogers to have a really good year. I mean, I've been vocal on this podcast about being a fan of Will Rogers. I think he is really underrated, to be completely honest with you. So I hope he has a breakout year this year. I'm looking for him to have a really good year, and Tulu Griffin as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a difficult transition going from the air raid back to more conventional pro style type of offense. But
Yeah.
I think the personnel does set up pretty well for them to make this easier than maybe it typically would be. Like you said, having Will Rogers is huge. I mean, for a first year head coach, to be able to have that kind of quarterback with that kind of experience and the accolades that Will Rogers has is huge. Jaquavius Marks is going to get a lot more carries now. I'm sure he's excited about it. But Jalen Wally, Ladedrick Griffin, they've got some really talented wideouts. And and I believe too they were last in the country in yards per completion last year. Obviously, with it being the air raid, a lot of short throws. Obviously, you complete 50 passes a game. A lot of those are, underneath routes. So yards per
Right.
completion what isn't very high typically in a Mike Leach offense. So um, this is a team that's going to run more play action. I think you're going to see them take more shots down the field because they have the athletes on the outside to be able to do that, and they have the quarterback to be able to do that. So yeah, you're going to see them run the ball obviously a lot more balance, and you're going to see them take more shots down the field. So I'm excited. And that's really the biggest question for this team is just how the offense transitions from the air raid, because they've been recruiting for the air raid too. And that's one of the biggest things is, they haven't necessarily been recruiting for this style of offense the last few
Right.
years. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. But I do think the personnel there, and you mentioned 4 out of 5 starters back on the offensive line is going to be huge too. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how their offense is able to transition. Pretty easy non-conference slate for Mississippi State. I mean, starting out Southeast Louisiana and Arizona. I think that week 3 game at home against LSU could be really interesting because you look this state team on paper, they do return, a lot on the offensive side. And defensively, they don't return quite as much, but I think the continuity there is going to help a lot. Matt Brock gets promoted to
Yeah.
defensive coordinator. He actually coordinated the bowl game, and they had probably their best defensive performance of the year. Got a lot of sacks on Illinois, so I don't think there's going to be too much of a drop off there. The only question mark for me is the secondary.
Big time.
They lost Emmanuel Forbes to the draft, obviously, so they're going to be inexperienced in the secondary. But their front should be really solid. Front 7, they return the top 2 leading tacklers in the SEC,
Yeah.
and Jet Johnson and Nathaniel Watson at linebacker. So those 2 guys are really going to anchor that defense. I think their defensive line is going to be pretty solid as well. So the biggest key for me is the secondary and kind of how that offense is able to evolve. But you look on paper, this is a really solid team, and it's kind of the way the whole SEC West is. There's not an easy out in the West. I mean, all 7 of these teams are going to be tough on any given Saturday. I mean, they're all going to be really competitive. It's super balanced, really top to bottom for the most part. And even some of the teams that don't have quite as good talent, I think a couple of those teams, I've been talking about Auburn a good bit. I think they could surprise people a little bit. And same with Mississippi State. I think they could surprise people a little bit too because they've got the personnel to be able to do that. So obviously not everybody can finish up at the top in the West. So somebody's got to be 6th or 7th. But even the teams in 6th and 7th, they're going to be really solid this year.
100%. Yeah, I'm excited to see this defense, like you talked about, the defensive front, returning the 2 leading tacklers at linebacker. That position really anchors this defense. Is going to have to this season, but it anchors the defense for Zach Arnett and their offense. I mean, their defensive line. They got Nathan Pickering, Jaden Crumity, Jordan Davis, DeMonte Russell. I mean, they got guys out the wazoo that has a lot of starts, a lot of experience under their belt. So, like you said, that front 7 is really going to have to anchor them down this season and really set the tone for them. But they do got some guys that transferred in the secondary. Free safety Chris Keys came from Kentucky. He's a sophomore. And Jacoby Albert also came in, or he's from Kentucky. And Indiana transfer is Chris Keys. They both, one's a safety, one's a free safety. So they're both coming in trying to strengthen that defensive backfield, along with newcomer Isaac Smith. He was their highest rated recruit last year. He's a safety. Or in this last cycle, he committed when the coaching change was happening. So he's bought in, and he didn't get to play a lot in the spring. He had some injuries, but they're looking for him to make an early impact and potentially get a lot of playing time early on. And so I'm excited to see, how that defensive backfield looks, because Zach Arnett is a defensive genius, and he turned that defense around last 2 years. So I'm excited to see what he does when he's fully at the helm and he can make all the decisions, and he's making the final call on everything when it comes to the defense, which I know he was as the defensive coordinator, but everything runs through him now and he makes the final call. So I'm excited to see and ready to see how that defense plays out, because even though they're a little slim when it comes to experience in the secondary, I don't think that they're going to be. I don't think that's going to reflect the production on the field because Zach Arnett, like I said, is a genius.
Yeah, I think for Zach Arnett as well, I think it really helped him being the defensive coordinator for Mike Leach because, and he even referenced this at media days, was he thought he had the best defensive coordinator job in the country because coaching for Mike Leach, he had total freedom on defense.
Right.
Like he had the total keys. There wasn't really much input from the head coach. Like it was his show on defense. And he said that really kind of prepared him to be able to step into this role as being head coach now. And he said him and Matt Brock are really aligned. They think really along the same lines defensively. So I think it's a very seamless transition, with Zach Arnett stepping up as the head coach and Matt Brock at defense coordinator, because they're very aligned on their philosophies, their values. So I think it'll be a nice transition for those two. And I think Zach Arnett coaching under Mike Leach and having that freedom on defense to kind of run it as he sees fit, help prepare him even more for this opportunity that he has now.
100%. You mentioned that, they're out of conference really isn't all that, to cry about, but they jump right in when it hits SEC play, and they got LSU, South Carolina, and Alabama out the gate. Two of those games are at home. I mean, they got pretty much what you'd say, quote unquote, their toughest games, maybe minus Texas A&M at home. So that's in their favor. They got 8 home games this year. But I'm with all the praise that we've been talking the last 10 minutes about Mississippi State, we've had nothing but good things to say. But Cameron said it best. There's no easy out, but even when its teams are in a conference or a league like that, when there's no easy out, somebody's got to take the loss. They may not be a bad team, but somebody's got to take a loss on Saturday. And I think that Mississippi State is going to find themselves on the wrong end of some really, really, really good games. I just don't think they have the depth there. And like you said, they recruited for the air raid offense, and they're changing to a pro style, more balanced attack. So I think later in the season, it could come back and hurt them a little bit. Obviously with injuries and staying healthy, that always has a play in it. But I think they're going to find themselves on the wrong side of some of those games. But I think they're going to be in a lot of games, if not every game. I don't see them getting blown out much. I think they're going to try to get their revenge on LSU from that lackluster performance they had early on last year. Lost me some money. I was very upset about that. But I just don't think they're going to be able to pull out some of these games. But I think that they're all going to be super, super entertaining. And I think laying the spread with Mississippi State a fair amount this year is going to pay off in the long run, because I think they're going to be in a lot of games. But I'm thinking best 8-4, but I'm feeling more like 7-5 is what I'm really feeling. And I think maybe Will Rogers and the leadership of that offense and how old they are and the camaraderie they have maybe can lift them to 8 wins. But I just don't see them repeating 9 wins this year. I just don't see it happening.
I don't either, to be honest, and really it's more about their schedule and the depth of the SEC West than it really is about them, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Like I said, a tough crossover matchup, with South Carolina and Kentucky. I would say those behind, probably Georgia and Tennessee, those are the next, probably 3rd and 4th best teams in the East. So you're getting 2 quality teams out of the other division. And then obviously we've already talked about the West, I think. And some of their more, I guess you could say, favorable matchups like Arkansas and Auburn are on the road. And then
they're really back to back on the road. That's really tough.
Yeah. And then, you probably the top 2 teams in the West are both at home. So even though they have 8 home games, some of those maybe more favorable, I guess you could say, are on the road, like A&M as well is on the road for them. So South Carolina. So, I think they're more 6 to 7 wins, honestly. And like I said, it's more just about the league than it is about them. Like you said, I think they're going to be on the wrong side of a couple really close losses, more than likely. Like you said, you may want to plus Mississippi State a good bit this year, because they're going to be an underdog in a lot of these, but probably not very heavily in a lot of cases. So, But yeah, I think this is a team, they're probably in the top 30 or 35 in the country, and they may go 6-6.
Yeah,
I mean, it's very
honestly, I mean, I have
possible.
them right down 6-6, 7-5, and I'm thinking their ceiling is 8-4.
I do as well. I think they're in that 6 to 8 range. I'd probably lean more 6 or 7 just because of the
Yeah.
schedule and the
Mhm.
difficulty of it. Like I said, just a cut and maybe if some of those toss up games, like the Egg Bowl or like at Arkansas or at Auburn, if some of those were to go their way, then they may get to 8 and maybe overperform a little bit. But I still think they're going to have a solid year. But like I said, the depth of the West and a couple tough crossover matchups is going to make it tough. But I think
I think
overall it'll be a successful season.
I think the losses are going to start piling up after their bye week. They get Western Michigan, and they have a bye, and then they're for the next month. 3 of their games are on the road, and they're against high quality opponents. 2 of the teams I think are going to be in the top of the league. So in A&M and Arkansas, I'm really high on Arkansas this year. So I think, and then you have to go to Auburn, and then you host Kentucky. Kentucky's never a slouch, but I think when their losses are going to potentially start piling up is after that bye week. It's on for the next month. I mean, they're running through a gauntlet.
And it's crazy too, like you mentioned, before the bye week, you got to play LSU, South Carolina, and Alabama in
Yeah,
3 straight
yeah.
weeks, and then they finally throw them a bone with Western Michigan, and then okay,
Then you get to rest.
yeah, we're on our bye week, and then we got to start a gauntlet of 3 out of 4 on the road against Arkansas, Auburn, Kentucky, and A&M, all solid teams. So, yeah, it's tough. I mean, but like I said, I think they're more. I would probably go like 6-6. I think they
Mm.
finish. I think they finish 6th or 7th in the West, honestly. But that, like I said, it's more of a testament to the league than it is to them because I think all in all they're going to be a very solid team.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I said, I think they're going to be in pretty much every game, except maybe maybe 1 or 2 get away a little bit. But for the most part, I think they're going to be right there in it week in and week out. But man, it's just a tough, brutal league. So, but overall, I think it's going to be a I think you'll look back and it'll be a pretty solid year 1 for Zach Arnett, but with the schedule, the depth of the West, and then the transition to the pro style, maybe they're a little bit slower out of the gate potentially.
Mm.
So, um, but yeah, no, I like this team a lot. I'm really interested to see how that transition, transpires early on in the season. A couple more favorable games early on, I think, will help them get going a little bit.
Yeah, and kind of keeping things the same. I would say the equivalent team on the east side of the conference is to Mississippi State would be South Carolina. I mean, I think that's a fair comparison, and that's the other team we're covering this week. They also don't return. They return 11 starters, and 2 of them are one of them's the punter and one of them's the kicker. So they return 9 starters. So there is a bunch of new faces for South Carolina this year, new staff members. They brought in Dow Loggins to be the new offense coordinator, who spent 10 years in the NFL as quarterback coach and offense coordinator. He's been to Arkansas the last few years as a positions coach, and so he's coming in. Shane Beamer brought him in. I think that's a good fit, especially with the quarterback that you have with Spencer Rattler. Big time former 5-star recruit, number 1 recruit in the class, or number 2 recruit, whatever he was, but big time player. Kind of flashed his freshman year or his first year at Oklahoma, and then kind of fell off, left and transferred, and then last year their first 7 SEC games they averaged less than 3 touchdowns a game. And then their last 3, they averaged 44 points a game, and they were all against ranked teams. So it's there, and it can be done. But they did lose a lot of guys from the offense last year. But I think bringing in Dow Loggins, like I said, quarterback coach in the NFL, bringing him in with Spencer Rattler, working with him, trying to get him obviously to the NFL, but work on the things that he needs to work on now that he's a senior. There's not really a whole lot of things you can reteach or tell someone and change, but just making him better and more precise and understanding reads and things along those lines. I'm excited to see what he does with Spencer Rattler. I'm a pretty voice Spencer Rattler, not hater, but disagreeer, you'd say. he did grow on me a little bit last year towards the end of the year, but I really do wish nothing the best for him. And I just like to make a lot of fun, make people laugh on here. But I really am excited to see what he can do with Spencer Rattler because, like I said, the last 4 games of the season last year, Spencer Rattler came on, and he was the Spencer Rattler what he was supposed to be, after his freshman year at Oklahoma. So, what are your thoughts on that situation, bringing in a new offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I thought listening to Shane Beamer, his comments at media days, and also listened to an interview with Spencer Rattler at media days, and they both kind of echoed the same thing with their offense. They said they really took off at the end of the season because they figured out which personnel groupings kind of fit them the best and what they had the most success with.
Mm-hmm.
And they really limited their personnel groupings toward the end of the year. And that's kind of when they really took off because Spencer Rattler was saying a lot of guys, weren't on the same page, were kind of confused maybe what they were supposed to be doing. So kind of simplifying things and limiting some of the personnel groupings and kind of sticking to a core set of groupings, I guess you will, offensively, really simplified things for them. I think allowed them to play faster with more confidence, and the results really showed up. I mean, you look at the Florida game late in the year, they lost 38-6 at Florida, didn't even score an offensive touchdown. And then their last 3 games, 63 points against Tennessee, 31 in Death Valley against Clemson, and then 38 in the
Comeback
bowl
on
game
that.
to
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame. Yeah, I mean, obviously the 2 huge wins against Tennessee and Clemson
They
back to
blew it
back.
against Notre Dame. They were up big.
Yeah, so I mean, their offense really kind of took off late in the year. Spencer Rattler obviously kind of spearheading that. So I'm excited to see if they can kind of take that momentum and what they learned, into this year, because he was a really different quarterback down the stretch, and they return a lot of their skill players. Offensive line, not quite as much, but Juice Wells, I think, probably one of the more underrated players in the SEC. DeCarrion Joyner, they moved him to running back in the spring because they've been very limited at running back, very few scholarship running backs. So they moved him there, and they like the progress that he's made. So he's probably going to stick there at least for the time being. But they've got, I believe, Xavier Leggett as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got some really good skill players, and obviously the quarterback returning. The big question marks for me is the offensive line wasn't very good last year. They don't have many guys returning up front, and then they couldn't generate a pass rush. And really they couldn't stop the run either. So on both lines of scrimmages were really the weak points and the reason they didn't probably do better than they did, even though they had a great year. But I just don't know if they've made enough progress on both lines of scrimmage to really take that other step forward this year. I do think it's going to be tough to match that 8-win total. Phil Steele's got this as one of the toughest schedules in the country. It's actually his number 2 ranked schedule because you're out of conference. You've got Clemson, your annual rival, and then you open in Charlotte against North Carolina. I mean, those were the top.
They got Drake May.
Yeah, that's the top 2 teams in the ACC last year. That was last year's ACC title game. You got to play both of them. You've got a great quarterback you mentioned in Drake May. Clemson, I think, is going to bounce back this year, be right there in the playoff conversation again, top the ACC. Obviously, that's always a tough game to end the year. So it's going to be tough to match that 8-win total. I ultimately don't think they'll do that.
No.
But offensively, I think they are going to be very good. They added Trey Knox from Arkansas, along with Dow Loggins,
Joshua Simon as well.
Yeah, so they're going to be really solid offensively. I think they did learn a lot at the end of the year that they can carry on to this year and kind of grow on that. So offensively, I think they're going to be really good. But I'm a little worried about the run game, being able to protect him up front. Yeah. I just don't think they're good enough on the offensive line. And they lost arguably their best offensive lineman in the spring game to a knee injury. It was the name is Jalen Nichols, the left tackle. Yeah. He tore his ACL in the spring game. So I just think that's really going to hurt them and kind of keep them from taking that next step. But overall, I think it's a solid team. I think it's going to be a positive year for them, but it will be tough to
Mhm.
match that win total just based on the schedule and some of the holes that they still have.
Yeah, I think obviously losing Nichols at the offensive line spot or at left tackle hurts, but they do have a fair amount of starts spread out over that offensive line. They're three juniors and two seniors on that offensive line, so I think that they'll be able to handle that a little better than some people are expecting. But like you said, their running back room is really light. You got Juju McDowell, Lavassier Carroll. He's more used out of the backfield in passing games rather than handing the ball straight off. He's a real small guy, 180 pounds, I believe. And then they got a D2 transfer, Mario Anderson, coming in. There's a lot of hype around him, thinking he could, be the guy to carry the load for the backfield. He played 3 years at the Division II level, had multiple records at the school he played. So I'm excited to see what they can do. But I think you're right. I don't think that they're going to match their win total last year. I think that, they got to play Tennessee at Tennessee. They got to go to Georgia as well, and they got to go to Texas A&M. So, I mean, they do, like you said, number 2 ranked schedule, toughest schedule. I don't know, that things lighten up a little bit towards the end of the year. They have Jacksonville State and Vandy, and then they go right back into Kentucky and Clemson. So I think they have a toss-up game against Florida. Right now, I have them, beating Florida, but anything could happen there. I think it's a tough game to open out of the gate with, like against North Carolina. You were just talking about. I think that's going to put a sour taste in their mouth at the beginning of the year. They do have a bunch of guys, not a bunch. They do have 2 guys in the secondary returning that were freshman All-American last year, and Nick Emanwari and DQ Smith. Both of those guys, like I said, freshman All-American. Depending on which place you look, they were tabbed by different people as All-Americans. But a really cool story about Nick Emanwari. He was like 4th string on the depth chart last year going into the season, or in the spring, and then he worked his way up in the season, was number 2 on the depth chart game 1, and then first play or first drive for the defense. Guy he was behind had an injury, and so he played the rest of the year and started the rest of the games and ended up leading the team in tackles. So he was only a 3-star. So that tells you anything about recruiting. Yes, it matters, but stars are not everything, because that man turned into an SEC All-American, led his team in tackles, and wasn't even the starter until week 2 officially. He had to become the starter in week 1, but he was just going to get some decent, really good playing time, but he wasn't going to be the guy. And they turned to him, they needed him, and he put him on their back, and he did what he had to do. But I agree. They got Tonka Hemingway back, senior defensive lineman, big time guys. So their front is going to be all right, but there's a lot of inexperience and a lot of new guys coming in from the transfer portal or really young guys. So I don't see them matching their win total, and I don't really see a great year for South Carolina ahead. I think they're kind of in the same ballpark as Mississippi State. Like I said, they're kind of the same team as them on the East. But I think 5-7, 6-6, maybe they could pull out a win, and stun somebody here or there. But I don't. They're not going to beat Georgia. I really don't see them beating Tennessee in Neyland, and North Carolina. I don't think they're going to be ready for them. So other than that, your rest of your schedule is kind of laid out. You got a toss-up game there against Florida, I think, but I think everyone else or everything else is kind of laid out, and you know what's going to happen. Kentucky, I guess, could be a toss-up game as well, but I'm thinking 6-6, 5-7, max ceiling 7-5.
Yeah, I'm thinking along those lines as well. I think probably 6-6. I look at to me, if they want to match last year's win total, get to 8 wins, I think the 2 toss-up games they need to have are Mississippi State, their week 4. That's a game they need to have. And then Kentucky, because they're going to be close to Kentucky in the standings. Like, those are probably my 3-4 teams in the East.
Mm-hmm.
So, if that's a game they can get, that they may get them to 3rd place in the East. But like you mentioned, I don't think they win at Georgia, at Tennessee, at A&M. But I think a team like Vandy, they'll beat, at Missouri, that's a winnable game for them. Florida at home, I mean, that's a winnable one. That's one they need as well. So Kentucky, Florida, Mississippi State, those are games they need to have if they want to get back to that 7 or 8 win mark. and it is doable. I mean,
Mhm.
they're good enough to do so. But I think the out of conference just makes it tougher as well. It's going to be tough to beat Clemson again. North Carolina is going to be very formidable week one as well. So, but like you said, this is a really solid team, and I think regardless if it's 6 wins or 7 wins, wherever they fall in that mark, I don't think it's going to do anything to change the momentum of South Carolina. Like, I
No.
think you're going to look back at the end of 2023 and the trajectory is still going to be pointing up. So
Yeah.
I don't think anything's going to happen to change their trajectory or really change our opinion on Shane Beamer or this program. I still think they're going to be looking in the right direction after this, but I just I don't think they have the line of scrimmage necessarily to get up to 9 or 10 wins, and just with the schedule is just so tough.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it maybe could happen to get to 7, maybe 8. I mean, they do got some guys that didn't play last year or were injured last year, like Jordan Strachan and Muhammad Rakaba. They're both back, along with David Spalding. Those guys all had injuries last year, so they were out for the year. David Spalding was hurt, I think, week 3, week 4, somewhere along those lines. So there are some guys that have played together, have some camaraderie, and understand what it takes. Have played under the lights, been on the biggest stage. So that they aren't technically starters or returning starters because they didn't play much last year or they didn't play at all because of injury. So there are some guys returning that have been there, and so that could maybe raise it to 7, 8 wins. But there's a possibility. Obviously, there's always a possibility. People are picked last and they end up winning the league all the time. I just realistically, I don't see that happening this year. Like you said, I don't think it's going to be, they're not going to suck, but the league is so stacked, and I just don't think that they're quite on the level playing field with all the other teams that need to compete and be at the highest level of this league.
yeah, I'm with you. I don't think they have enough to get into the top two in the East. I would probably put them. I'm very torn on them in Kentucky because I think Kentucky's got a really solid team as well. So I'm kind of torn who I feel like is going to be third or fourth. I feel like they're kind of interchangeable, honestly. Could come down to that game on November 18th to decide that spot. But no, like you said, every team we've covered, I mean, these are such quality teams, but as we've said before, not everybody, everybody can't win 9 or 10 games. Even
Yeah.
though a few things here or there they probably could, but it's just the depth of this league, and I think doing these previews just makes me realize and
Yeah.
appreciate the depth and the talent that this league has. I mean, it's special. I mean, there's a reason it's the best conference in the country. They recruit the best. They have the best quality crop of coaches in the country. So it's just I'm more and more impressed every time we do these previews and deep dives into these teams, and it just kind of reiterates how special this league is and how much I enjoy watching these teams go at it. But like I said, even these teams tonight, South Carolina, Mississippi State, like these are top 25, top 30 teams, and they may go 6-6 or 7-5. Like that's how good this league is. It's impressive.
100%. I do. I'm glad that Juice Wells decided to come back. I think that's a big part of this year's team. If they didn't have him, I think they might win 2 games. But you got to have a guy that your star quarterback can get the ball to. I think Juice Wells is probably their best player out of their whole team. Came from JMU, so I'm ready to see what he does this year and how he improves his draft stock. Because I'm a big fan of him.
I am as well. I think that's ginormous for them. Um, I think this is going to be one of the top connections in the SEC this year. I think Spencer Rattler, Juice Wells are prime for big years this year. Because a lot's going to be on their plate. I mean, obviously they're expected to take that next step forward based on the way they ended last year, and I think
Right.
they've got the capability to do that. And I'm excited to see them another year under Shane Beamer. So I think they're in for really, really nice years, and they're going, they're going to have a chance to, surprise some people potentially, because I mean, like I said, a lot's going to be on their plate. But they could do it. I mean, like I said, there's not an easy out in this league, so you never know when a team that's maybe better than you has a little bit of an off day, and this team is capable, but it's going to be definitely a challenge. As Shane Beamer mentioned, he said it's a challenge, but it's a privilege to play this kind of schedule. Like, we're not forced to play the schedule; like, we get to play this schedule. Like, they're
Yeah.
embracing the challenge of playing these teams. So I'm excited to see kind of where they end up this year, and if they can continue on that trajectory like we know that they're on.
All right. So you said it's believed to be the number 2 hardest schedule in the country, and we all know that Georgia's got a cupcake schedule. Got a question for you. If you flip this schedule and you take week 3 and you make that South Carolina and you make this Georgia schedule, do you think Georgia still goes undefeated the way we believe they're going to this year, or do you think that they might have a trip up? Because I mean, this is a gauntlet.
Yeah, I mean, it would definitely, obviously, I mean, obvious answer is it would be much, much tougher. I mean, you got Clemson on here. I mean,
North
obviously Georgia
Carolina.
plays Kentucky, a tough crossover matchup with Texas A&M. That's going to be a tough game. Like you mentioned, North Carolina still would have at Tennessee. So, yeah, it would be much, much more challenging. So, and I think they would have much better chance of losing the game. They
You
still
go into the games less confident than you would this year going into the games as a Georgia fan.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to see a night and day picture, look at Georgia's schedule in 2023 versus 2024. I mean,
Yeah.
it is night and day. So we won't be able to say Georgia's got a cupcake schedule after this year because
No.
the way the league's going in 2024, nobody's got a cupcake schedule, starting then. So and even the teams with the easier schedules, it's still a lot more difficult than most teams. But no, yeah, if this was Georgia's schedule, I would feel. I mean, it would definitely change my perspective a little bit, even though they still could go undefeated under the schedule. But it would be a lot more challenging for sure. But just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Kind of before we log off for this podcast. This gonna be our 3rd video on YouTube. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, reach out on our social media at Saturdays_SEC on Twitter. Leave comments on the video on YouTube. We'd love to hear your feedback. Just your overall thoughts. If you have any questions or just want to talk about something random, that's fine too. We welcome it. But yeah, please support the channel, like the video. As I said, we really, really appreciate it. And we'll be back next week for part 4 of our 2023 SEC preview series. I've really enjoyed this so far. And by next episode, we will have flipped the calendar to August. Fall camps will be starting about this time next week. So man, we are right around the corner, and I know, speaking for both of us here, we couldn't be happier.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next week.